Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The War Bride's Oath. Episode 2. The war god let out a long sigh, caressing her hair once more. He was visibly unwilling to part with his daughter, which was understandable. What man would send his daughter and niece abroad by themselves, to a country they knew almost nothing of? The fact that he was sending her with his dragon spoke volumes. The truth was, Yasum was a bit curious as to why Cecilia didn't seem to have a dragon herself, or by her side. From what he had seen, dragons could be away from their masters for prolonged periods of time, but it still seemed odd that she wouldn't be bringing hers, if she had one, with them to the Eastern Kingdom. Or was this as a precaution, perhaps? The old man didn't dare ask, for he feared they would have misunderstood it as him trying to invite a dragon owner, rather than a princess. Plus, the war god's dragon would be coming along. How dare he ask for one more? "Stay here tonight," suddenly said the war god. "You can leave tomorrow morning." Cecilia glanced Yasum's way, and he realized she was asking for his opinion. He immediately nodded. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Highness." The war god slightly squinted his eyes, with no intention to answer. "Take all you need," he added. "Oh, can I take some weapons from the armory, uncle?" exclaimed Tessa, suddenly very excited. He nodded, and the young woman squealed, running out of the room to wherever the armory was. Cecilia chuckled. "I will ask Auntie Nebera for some food," she said, "and warmer clothes." She turned to Yasum. "It is colder there, isn't it?" "Yes, my lady. But not as cold as these lands. Because our kingdom is crossed by many rivers, the weather is more humid, and the temperatures do not change as drastically." "Take as much as you need," said the war god. "Gold too?" Yasum couldn't help but feel a bit hopeful as he heard this. The Dragon Empire was much, much richer than their broken kingdom. He had witnessed this fact many times over. Their money was the same, but because gold was withheld in the chests of the wealthy back in the kingdom, it wasn't circulating as much, and their primary currency was silver, which was getting rarer as well. Meanwhile, here, the noble and wealthy wore gold as if it was nothing. Not only that, but they sold and bought luxury items such as gems, jewelry, or fabrics as a perfectly fine way of trading too, while in the Eastern Kingdom, defiance had brought their people to only rely on the silver change to buy only the most needed goods. Yasum had gotten used to it after several days of crossing the empire, but the princess already wore much more gold on herself than he had witnessed in several years in the Eastern Kingdom. Even the middle and lower classes here were already much wealthier than most of the Eastern Kingdom's people, who lived day to day with little to no resources. There was no common measure between their two nations' wealth. In fact, he had even been surprised by how sparsely decorated this castle was, considering it was a prince's house, and one of the wealthiest men in the empire, at that. If Princess Cecilia and her cousin brought a bit of gold, it would be a dim light of hope in the Eastern Kingdom if they were to spend it. "I will," nodded Cecilia. "I can have clothes made if I need to. Don't worry. I will take all I need, or buy it over there." The war god nodded, visibly satisfied with those answers. Just then, Tessa came back, carrying two long and sharp swords with an ecstatic smile. However, Cecilia frowned. Tessa. Those are Darson's. I know, replied her cousin, excited. And he won't know for a while that I took them. He's never let me take them, so this is his loss for being punished. Oh, these are amazing. Is this really fine, Dad? Muttered Cecilia. The war god shrugged, visibly not caring much over his niece borrowing his son's weapons. Instead, he turned to Nebera as the servant walked back into the room with a large fur coat in her arms. They will need more, he said. I know, my lord, replied the woman. We're already gathering all they need for the journey and putting it with Cray. Ceci, I prepared some of your clothes too, but feel free to take anything you want. And take some money. Oh, and jewelry too. You should look your best if you are going there as our representative. A princess can't look too shabby. Yesem almost choked himself. Shabby? The princess cousin alone was already wearing more than enough to impress the whole Eastern Kingdom's court. Some of the nobles' ears would bleed if they heard this exchange. He didn't dare say anything, though, and watched as Tessa took a seat by the fire, her fingers lovingly sliding along the sword's blades. Cecilia went to pour the tea, just like her mother had done earlier, and her father sat down, closing his eyes and resting in the large seat. Your Highness, muttered Yesem, gathering his courage. May I ask how come you're residing here? Instead of at the imperial palace. The war god didn't even open his eyes or manifest in any way that he had heard the question. For a second, Yesem worried he had overstepped, but to his surprise, Princess Cecilia answered instead. Father hates crowds. He doesn't want to live in the imperial palace with our aunt. Mom goes more often. When will she come back? Suddenly asked the war god, opening his eyes at the mention of his wife. Cecilia and Tessa exchanged a glance. I don't know. The prince grimaced and closed his eyes again, visibly unhappy with that answer. Yesem glanced toward the two young women, but neither of them looked surprised. Cecilia offered him some dried fruits, and the old man gladly took them, a bit hungry indeed. Is there anything else we could need? She asked. I don't believe so, my lady. The kingdom will provide you with everything you need upon your arrival. His Majesty will have a room for you in the castle. A room, repeated Tessa. Is she going as a future wife or a guest? Yesem almost bit his tongue, realizing his mistake, but before he could think of something to say, Cecilia shook her head. I haven't decided yet, Tessa. Getting a room for ourselves is better. The young cousin, staring at Yesem with a suspicious expression, was about to ask something else, but her eyes met with her uncle's, and she didn't dare to. That's right, nodded Nebera. You should see and take your time to examine the situation first. What wedding now? Tessa told me everything, old man. How dare he summon Ceci like that? Is your king a good man? Because we are not going to marry away one of our precious girls to some pighead. Pighead? Yesem repeated, shocked. My lady, I can assure you, King Ashen is not a pighead. There were a lot of other ways to describe his king, and although he certainly had some concerning strength of character, to go as far as to call a monarch a pighead was too much. Moreover, coming from the mouth of a servant. Yesem was expecting the empire to look down on their neighbor a little, but this was just too much. He'd better, scoffed Nebara. Otherwise, you can be assured he won't last long. That girl's brothers will happily come and take her back home if needed. Auntie Nebi, muttered Cecilia. She's right, you know, chuckled Tessa. As soon as Cashin and Darson hear of this, you can expect them to come and make a major fuss there. That's why we shouldn't stay here too long. I mean, evading the little ones is easy, but wait until those two hear Ceci is in the Eastern Kingdom, it will be a show. Yesem was getting worried all over again. He had mistakenly thought the war god would be the biggest issue, not the older princes. He couldn't help but think about Dran, the yellow dragon outside. What if his master got mad at them for taking his sister? Plus another one, the older brother at that? 2 dragons would come to wreak havoc in the Eastern Kingdom. Not only the war god's dragon but 2 more. What had he done? His kingdom would surely fall in no time. My lady, he gasped. Your brothers wouldn't really attack the kingdom, would they? We have nothing to defend ourselves against dragons. Don't worry, said Cecilia. They are not unreasonable. Unless it comes to Ceci, muttered Tessa, sending a chill down poor Yasem's old back. We won't tell them yet, said Nebara. Cashin is still in the north, and Darson will still be stuck for a few more weeks to take care of that mountain. You have at least a few weeks until they come here and realize you're gone. Moreover, they won't dare to make a ruckus in another kingdom. The Empress would skin them alive. Yesem couldn't think straight anymore. Every member of the imperial family sounded way too dangerous. Yesem had thought things would be over quickly once he brought the princess, and he'd find out soon enough if he was to lose his head or not, but now, it was clear even if that didn't happen right away, the princes would come sooner or later to punish his bravery. The old man sighed without thinking, while Cecilia handed him a cup of hot tea. Are you all right, Sir Yesem? She asked him. I am, my lady. I am just worried I have sold my poor head for taking your highness away from her family. Don't worry. She smiled. My brothers are not bad. It was heartwarming to see such a gentle young woman speak lovingly of her brothers, while he worried the young princes would destroy an entire kingdom for her sake. Still, Yesem knew there wasn't much that could be done now. He could only hope this reckless plan of his would turn out for the better. After this, it was clear they were to dine in this same room, with Nebara bringing little plates of food for them to eat. The meal served here may have been simple in their eyes, but to Yesem, it was truly a feast. There was a gigantic piece of meat, dried meat, many types of fruits and vegetables, several dishes he couldn't even identify, cheese, and desserts. He was glad to eat, but it was hard to swallow anything in the war god's presence. Although he didn't say much, the man would sometimes take some meat to eat, and go back to resting. Cecilia had moved to sit on a cushion against her father's legs, her arms and head resting on his lap. He was caressing her long, brown curls from time to time, using his other hand to eat. Both young women had many questions for Yesem and kept asking him about the Eastern Kingdom relentlessly. It was obvious Cecilia knew more than he had thought already. The young woman had read dozens of books, some about lands even farther away than theirs, and she was mostly asking to differentiate tales from reality, while Tessa had heard from folks more than books, as the little they knew about the kingdom was brought by the few goods and people who did travel across the border. It was strange to think that the border had been open for many years, yet only a handful of people dared to cross it each year. There were good reasons for it, though. On one side, the people of the Eastern Kingdom were scared of the Dragon Empire, with its strange customs, dragons, and, most importantly, higher costs. On the other side, the Dragon Empire citizens had no reason to cross over. The kingdom was much too poor, didn't have goods worth trading that couldn't be found in the empire, and the years of tyranny or civil war had convinced them it wasn't worth the journey. Yasim himself had been baffled at how easy of a journey it was, but how hard it had been for him once inside. The prices were too high for him to buy much more food than he had brought, and his savings were quickly depleted when he had no choice but to use them. Hence, he was more than grateful for each free meal he was given, like tonight. So, most of the system already changed anyway, didn't it? Sighed Tessa. The rich people got overthrown and robbed, and what was true a few years ago changed when your new king came to power, then. Yes, Lady Tessa. King Ashen got rid of his father's policies right away, and chased or killed all of the former supporters of King Ashtaran. He only kept people who swore allegiance by his side, including this humble servant. Good spring cleaning, scoffed the young woman, biting into a piece of juicy meat. As of today, there are only 9 lords allowed in the court, and His Majesty's people. Those 9 lords are the richest, most educated people of our kingdom, and those our people trust. Each one of them either took a stand against the former king or pledged allegiance to King Ashen once he took over the throne. They have lands, people, and money behind them, but they are all also highly educated and respected. I believe they are the equivalent of your empire's scholars. Our empire has 70 scholars, retorted Tessa, and they aren't that rich, either. And our aunt barely listens to any of them. Do they trust the king also? Asked Cecilia. Yasim smiled. This young lady was smart indeed. On the surface, they are his loyal servants, my lady. However, each one of those lords hopes to secure their position, and King Ashen is known to be quite particular in choosing his allies. To be honest, he doesn't trust any of them, my lady. Yet, he needs them to content the people, and prevent further fighting. Not only that, but my king also needs all 9 lords to get along, which is quite difficult at times. 9 rich people in a room to learn to share? Yeah, good luck with that, scoffed Tessa. Not just 9, my lady, sighed Yasim. Each lord represents his family, and at times, their wives, siblings, or children can hold as much power as they do. We talk of 9 lords, but for some of them, they hold a small clan behind them. Yet, those 9 are essential in maintaining balance. They all hold a dominant power in one or more domains our kingdom needs to be strong in: military, trade, finance, education, farming, science. Those people will help our young king shape the future of the kingdom, or we are bound to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. How about you? Aren't you a lord? I'm nowhere near any of those people, Lady Tessa. I am merely an old, wise man that this king was nice enough to keep by his side. Yasim felt very sad, pronouncing his words. Indeed, he had been lucky to stay alive until now, given his history, but his king wouldn't be so benevolent upon his return. It didn't matter whether he got to keep his head or not, though. As long as he could bring the princess to him, even his death would be worth it. All right, Yasim the Wise, yawned Tessa. Well, I hope you're as good of a guide as you are a storyteller, then, because now I am quite excited to visit that kingdom of yours. Let's go to sleep, agreed Cecilia, glancing toward her father. We should leave early tomorrow. The war god nodded, looking a bit tired, and he got up from his seat, gently offering his large hand to help her up. I'll send you off at dawn. For an old man like Yasim, being able to sleep on a thick, comfortable mattress was a luxury. He certainly hadn't expected to be so well received in the Onyx castle, the war god's residence. That servant woman named Nebera had shown him the bedroom he was to stay in after dinner, and he had been shocked to see such a nice room prepared for him, in such a short time, with even a fireplace bringing its dancing glow. Hence, it was no wonder he had fallen asleep right there, completely surrendering to his own exhaustion. He was woken up early by gentle knocks on the door, and it took him a few seconds to remember where he was, and what he was doing there. The fire had long been extinguished, and the room was cold and dark. "Good morning," said Nebera with a soft voice. "Did you sleep well? The girls are almost ready to leave. We wanted to let you sleep for as long as possible, but I fear time is up. You can still join Tessa for breakfast, though." "Ah, yes, thank you, Lady Nebera." The servant woman nodded and went to open the windows, but for some reason, Yasim found she was a bit cold toward him. He quickly grabbed his coat to put it back on with a shiver and washed his face with the little basin of warm water she had brought, brushing his beard quickly and trying to arrange the few white hairs scattered on his scalp. "Your king." He was surprised to hear her address him all of a sudden. The woman approached him with a severe expression. "He'd better be a good man," she said. "I've watched those girls grow up, I helped their mothers raise them. I love them like my own. I may only be a servant, but trust me, your king should fear me as much as those dragons if anything happens to either one of them." "I understand, my lady," muttered Yasim. After she was done talking, Nebera put back on a polite smile with an impressive calm, and walked out of the room, leaving him stunned. The women of the Dragon Empire were clearly as fiery as the dragons. Yasim let out a short sigh but quickly prepared himself, as he was worried about making the young ladies wait for him. He only had his coat and shoes to put back on, but as he did, he felt a bit nervous. Since they were flying back to his eastern kingdom, he couldn't help but wonder if he would make it to the end of the day. A lot of things were bound to happen, and he could only pray for a better outcome. Preventing himself from thinking too much, he walked out of the bedroom, noticing how dark the castle was despite the sky being lit by the moonlight. He hadn't really paid much attention before, but the walls were as dark as the castle's name. Could they really be onyx though? He didn't even dare touch it to test his theory. Resolute, Yasim found his way back downstairs, noticing his muscles weren't so sore anymore. Truly, a good night's sleep was the best remedy at his age. "Morning!" exclaimed Tessa when he stepped into the large salon from the previous night. Just like Nebera had said, the young woman was having her breakfast, a large selection of dried and fresh fruits, nuts, and cereals displayed before her. Quickly greeting her, Yasim walked to pour himself some tea. He was too nervous to be hungry, and could only sit on the edge of a stool, watching her eat ferociously. "Everything is packed and ready," she said, her mouth half full. "We'll get going soon." "That's great. What about Lady Cecilia?" "She's already outside. She's talking with her dad." "I see." Yasim didn't dare ask any more, so he quietly drank his tea, letting Tessa enjoy her breakfast in silence. He was a bit nervous, but already grateful they had let him sleep. Judging how her outfit was completely different, a thicker one with a long black coat, the girls had been up for a while already. He waited until Tessa was done eating to stand up with her and, without a word, they both walked to the castle's entrance. In the sky, the first purple waves were announcing the sunrise already. The black dragon was standing in the middle of the castle's courtyard, several bags fastened on his back, eating a large chunk of raw meat. This time, a couple of saddles had been put on his back, and Yasim realized this was probably meant for him. However, his eyes didn't stay on the dragon long. Farther away, two silhouettes were cut by the first rays of sunlight. The war god was talking to his daughter, the two of them facing each other closely. Yasim couldn't hear what was said, but he could see the big, green eyes of Cecilia on her father, full of tenderness. As if he couldn't bear to part with his daughter yet, the war god had his large hand on her cheek, also staring at her with a serious expression. Yasim felt a little pinch in his heart seeing this. He had never had the blessing to conceive any children himself, but this scene brought this old man a lot of emotions, just by witnessing it from afar. He only had a little satchel for himself, but Tessa brought another bag to put on the dragon's back while he stood there, a bit unsure of what to do next. The large creature truly didn't seem to mind carrying all of that. Its long tail merely wagged a bit as the young woman climbed on its back to secure everything once more. "Did you take your thicker coats?" asked Nebara, coming out of the castle behind him. "It's going to be colder up there." "Yes," shouted Tessa, patting one of the bags. "This one is for you," the servant woman suddenly said to him. To Yasim's surprise, he had to open his arms at the last second to receive a thick, heavy fur cape. This was one of the most magnificent pieces of clothing he had ever received. This was definitely made of a bear's fur and held with some leather straps, yet they casually gave this to him? "I can't accept such a valuable gift," he muttered, feeling the weight of that gift in his hands. "Just take it," said Nebara. "It's merely a little coat. With everything the boys hunt, we have dozens like this, so don't worry about it." Once again, he was astonished by the difference in wealth and strength. The war god's sons could hunt large beasts like these and gift away fur coats as if it was nothing. It was too impressive. In the Eastern Kingdom, the wars and fires had chased a lot of their fauna away from their former habitats, making such hunting prizes extremely rare and valuable. Still, he accepted the gift, bowing a couple of times, and put it on his back. This was indeed very warm, and heavy on his old bones. A few steps away, Cecilia hugged her father one last time, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. Then, they slowly parted, the war god's hand falling. "Mother will be back soon," she promised in a whisper. "I know." She gifted him with a smile and slowly walked up to Cray. There, she met poor Yasum, a bit lost in this situation. "Let's go," she said, climbing up. Yasum was definitely nervous to ride the black dragon again, but as they said, the second time could never be worse than the first. Hence, he did his best to climb up behind her on the mighty creature, trying to imitate her movements, until he saw Tessa's hand extended to help him up. The three of them were finally on the black dragon's back, and Yasum was brutally reminded of how tall the creature was. From there, the war god seemed a bit small all of a sudden. The prince walked up to his dragon, suddenly grabbing its snout and pulling it to him. The creature had still been busy licking and curating the last bits of its meal just a second ago, and growled. The war god stared at the creature, and the next second, the red eyes got a bit less intimidating, staring at its owner with curiosity. "Watch over them," simply said the war god. The dragon stayed quiet for a couple of seconds, before letting out a long, high-pitched growl. Then, the prince's eyes went up to meet his daughter's again. Seated at the back, Yasum couldn't see what Cecilia looked like, but, the next second, the black dragon suddenly jumped up in the air. If he hadn't already been holding on to the saddle, Yasum would have been thrown off. The dragon climbed fast and high, its large wings violently flapping the air around as it rose higher and higher. The cold morning wind slapping his face suddenly had Yasum realize how grateful he was for that thick coat. The two girls in front of him also wore similar ones, although theirs were made of precious snow leopard fur, white with the characteristic black prints. Yasum also suddenly understood their change of hairstyle. Tessa had bound her little braids around her head to keep it from flying in all directions, and Cecilia too had several little gold chains circling all around to keep it down. Because they were flying higher than before, the wind and cold were much stronger. When he finally dared to look down, Yasum recognized the Onyx castle as a little black point below. "We're right on time for sunrise," exclaimed Tessa, excited. Indeed, they were. Right ahead, the tip of the sun had just appeared on the sea, glowing brightly and sending warm colors into the sky ahead. Yasum was struck by this view. He had seen the sunrise before, many times in his life. However, never had he been able to witness such a view from the sky. He could see the miles and miles of sea ahead, its deep blue shades scattering all around the lands. Even more amazing, he was able, for the first time, to see his homeland from the sky. It was extraordinary. It was like looking at a living map, and he could actually recognize the lines many cultured people had tried to accurately copy on those maps. The various rivers that crossed their kingdom, scattered like a spider's web into thinner or thicker blue trails. "This is our first time flying above your country," said Tessa. "We were never allowed to go past the border before." "Welcome to the Eastern Kingdom, my ladies," nodded Yasum, a bit proud. "Can you tell us more about it?" asked Cecilia, sitting at the front. "Of course. There are 3 main rivers crossing our lands. The one most north is called Saha. Then, the second one, in the middle, is the one with the most ramifications, Saura. And then, the one at the bottom, the largest one that continues to your empire, is Riva." "Riva," repeated Tessa. "It's called Kiriva in our empire, and one of the most dangerous ones. All the places around are swamps." "Oh, not many of our people live in the south either. Our villages are mostly gathered around the two other rivers. A lot of our diet revolves around what our fishermen trap there. The villages seem localized by the sea, Cecilia noticed, her eyes looking down. Yes, my lady. We even have many islands farther east, although not many people live there. They get submerged when the sea goddess rises, but we use them to teach our children how to swim, bring our cattle to eat, and put traps to hunt bigger prey. Yasum suddenly pointed farther down below them. See that island, in the Saura bed? It is where our king's castle is, and our capital, Estera. Estera. The island was growing bigger, as Cray was slowly starting its descent. They could now see the very, very large river bed and the many little islands in it. It wasn't the sea, as there was a clear line following the coast, showing where the sea actually started. Miles and miles of beaches, yet, there was a clear opening where Saura started, as if the ground had been split apart to let the river through. Among all the islands present, it was easy to guess which one was the capital. It was the largest, and the one which all the other buildings seemed to be turned toward. However, for a few seconds, the girls didn't understand where the castle was actually located until they understood. It wasn't just an island among the others, this one was actually topped by a mountain-like city, like a large cone, with many buildings in the lower parts, and at the very top, a castle. It's a tidal island? Asked Cecilia. Exactly, my lady. Centuries ago, our ancestors took notice that this rocky formation looked like a mountain rising from the sea, and would be a perfect place to defend ourselves while also surveying our lands all around. They started by building a watchtower, but, as time passed, and we relied more and more heavily on the rivers, the tower was made part of a castle, and more buildings appeared all around. Cecilia could see that watchtower. Actually, despite the magnificent castle built all around, in white stone and large windows, the tower was fiercely standing out, its arrow proudly pointing at the sky. Even the colored glass windows didn't seem to outshine the golden arrow at the top, glowing even more under the sunrise. It's beautiful, she whispered. With your capital so far away, who knew you guys would have dared to come all the way to wage war with us, scoffed Tessa. We still have quite a few buildings closer to the border, admitted Yasum. Some are still used as the army's main base, but it has changed greatly over the last couple of decades. Although a bit too blunt, he knew the young woman was perfectly right. They clearly had no interests near the border, as they had focused most of the population, commerce, and cities to the southeast corner of their kingdom, away from the western border. However, it was a horrible decision that had been made by the wrong people in dire circumstances. 2 decades ago or so, their republic was completely drained of resources. The Dragon Empire couldn't have known about the diseases, the drained rivers, and the hunger that had driven their people mad. Those 2 girls had probably never experienced hunger themselves. Yet, Yasum was surprised by the way Cecilia was looking down at the land below them. It looked like she was learning, analyzing each river, each piece of land silently. He had already felt that upon meeting the young woman, but she didn't seem as candid as one would have expected a lady her age to be. Sometimes, there was a strange loneliness in her eyes, and the impression of someone who had gone through a lot, rather than a young, sheltered princess. Old man, "Where do we land?" asked Tessa over her shoulder. "This guy needs a large spot to go, or we're going to scare everyone in the middle of the city plaza." "Head to the tower," nodded Yasum. "On the lower left side, there's a little courtyard with a lot of ivy leaves and a mosaic on the floor. There should be enough space for us to land." "Got it." He realized Tessa and Cecilia had been directing the dragon all this time, with small taps or words. Once again, Cecilia leaned forward, whispered something to the dragon, and it changed direction, heading for the spot Yasum had indicated. As relieved as he was to be home, poor Yasum was also getting more and more nervous, as if riding a gigantic, mythical creature hadn't been enough emotions already for that morning. Below them, life in the Eastern Kingdom seemed to be going as it should be, with the people slowly waking up to another morning. Perhaps some would get a fright upon noticing the dark silhouette of a dragon in the sky. Finally, Cray softly landed in that courtyard that was actually just big enough for the dragon. Tessa helped Yasum down, and Cecilia got down on the other side. They were in a pretty courtyard with, as Yasum had described, lots of ivy climbing up the walls and little pillars all around them. There was a little water fountain to the side, and Cray went to drink some of it right away while Cecilia patted its neck. "It does feel different from home," she said. "More humid." "Well, we are surrounded by water, my lady. This area is actually where some of the future doctors come to study, and I live here myself." "This is your home?" asked Tessa, surprised. "Well, the castle is home to all of His Majesty's entourage, including the councillors, like myself." "Oh, so you're like our Aunt Femera," nodded Tessa. "She's our Empress advisor too, and she lives in the palace because of that." "Yes, my lady." Although, from what he had observed, the imperial palace of the Dragon Empire was at least 3 or 4 times bigger than this castle. Yasum was glad it was too soon for any student to be here. Their arrival probably hadn't gone unnoticed. He let out a long sigh while the girls took off their coats, leaving them on Cray's back among their other belongings. "What now?" asked Tessa. "Will you give us a tour?" Or she didn't get to finish her sentence, and instead, turned toward the ruckus that was happening at one end of the courtyard. Despite their outfits being different from the ones used in the Empire, those men were clearly guards. Yasum swallowed his saliva, while 6 men lined up, taking out their swords in a defensive stance. "Former Royal Councillor Yasum, the king requests your immediate presence in the throne room. You shall explain yourself for your return upon your exile ordered by the king, as well as bringing in foreigners, and their beast." The man's eyes went to Cray, filled with fear. He was doing his best not to show it, but as soon as the dragon's red eyes went on him, he couldn't help but slightly change his position, ready to step back or protect himself. Cray didn't care much, though. The dragon was busy sniffing one of the pillars and its climbing plants. Meanwhile, Cecilia and Tessa both turned toward Yasum, the latter putting her hands on her hips. "Forgot to tell us something, old man," she groaned. "My ladies," sighed Yasum. "From now on, I will have to rely on your understanding." For someone who was getting arrested right in front of them, Yasum seemed suspiciously calm and composed. Cecilia and Tessa exchanged another glance. They had tried to stop the soldiers with Tessa taking a step forward, but Yusum had asked them not to. It looked as if the old man had already anticipated all this, and was surrendering willingly, although it was odd. Moreover, none of the soldiers were actually acting rude to him or had even tried to bind him in any way. They simply flanked the former counselor, a hand on each of his shoulders and the other on their spears. There was obviously some respect there, perhaps because Yusum was obviously not going to resist them in any way. "My ladies," he said very calmly. "I am sorry for deceiving you. However, this shameless old man would be very grateful if you could accompany me again." The two young women once again exchanged another glance with each other. It was obviously all part of his plan. From the way those soldiers had arrived right away and focused on Yusum rather than them or even their dragon, there was something at play here. Cecilia nodded. She already trusted Yusum, although it was clear he had deliberately hidden some of the truth from them. She was also curious to see why he had risked everything just to bring her here. "Captain," whispered one of the men. "What about that?" He was obviously sending worried glances toward the dragon behind the girls, although Cray didn't seem to care at all. The soldiers were visibly confused, and not prepared for such an issue. Tessa chuckled, crossing her arms. "What? Never seen a dragon before?" Meanwhile, Cecilia turned around and walked back to Cray, gently petting its neck. She then whispered something to the dragon, who took off with most of their luggage still on its back. The girls only had time to unload one bag each, but that wasn't an issue for now. Turning around, she smiled gently at Yusum, bringing some relief to the old man. The soldiers were confused by the situation here and were exchanging glances. The six of them were already doing an impressive job at trying to do their job while faced with a dragon just a minute ago and the arrival of the two foreign women with an exiled counselor. Sparing them any more questions, Yusum gave them a gentle smile and joined his hands together like a benevolent grandfather. "All right, gentlemen. His Majesty should be holding the morning court right now. Shall we get going? Counselor Yusum, those women. These ladies are my guests, and I believe His Majesty would like to meet them also." The soldiers were troubled, but at least, they knew what to do next. Would the king really be happy about the exiled old man coming back with strangers? They had no idea what gave him so much confidence, but they were willing to roll with it. It wasn't their heads that were at risk here. The little group began moving, the 6 soldiers staying close to surround all 3 of them. Tessa was sending glares each time her eyes met with one of the soldiers, or they inadvertently came too close. Cecilia was more absorbed in the architecture around them. Unlike the Dragon Empire's imperial palace, this castle was mostly composed of large, grey stones and small spaces. The first corridor they walked through to get inside was surprisingly narrow to them, but it still had small little windows of tinted glass every 3 or 4 steps, which let plenty of light in. Unlike the white marble she was accustomed to, this castle had the same stones for walls and floors, and at times, a long jute rug would appear to cover the uneven stones. Everything in there felt foreign to the 2 young women, and they started walking close to each other without even noticing. Cecilia was surprised how little water fountains would sometimes appear randomly on a wall, or in a little sculpture in the middle of a crossway between corridors. The ceiling was lower than the high ones of their home, but it sometimes had strange openings, like a balcony, that would give a little view of a floor below or above. At some point, they walked into a corridor that had the right wall half open and showed a large, square room below. A handful of people were there, working at desks in what seemed to be a little library or study. It was very silent, and none of them even raised their heads as Yasim's group walked above. It was obvious everyone was used to those little balconies, but it fascinated Cecilia. In her aunt's palace, all the corridors were very wide and had arches so one could see the gardens on either side of it, and the rooms had a ceiling high enough that no man could reach. Here, it felt as if her father would have only had to raise his hand to touch it. "I'm very sorry I wasn't as honest as I had hoped to be with you, my lady," suddenly said Yasim. "There are circumstances. I am grateful for your benevolence." Cecilia didn't answer. She understood that Yasim only meant to apologize, but wasn't asking for her forgiveness. It was too soon for her to judge. Instead, the young woman was a lot more curious about what was going to happen next. Finally, the guards stopped in front of a pair of large, blue doors. Although they clearly led to an important room, they still looked small to the two young women, and Tessa frowned, wondering if two big, wooden panels were actually meant to protect anything. They could hear what was going on inside too. Some people were loudly shouting at each other, apparently trying to make a point. The soldiers hesitated for a little while, waiting until there was a bit less noise to bang on the doors and enter. They hadn't expected to see such a grand room after all they had seen so far. Yet, this was obviously the heart of the castle. A big, round room, with large windows of blue-colored glass, and an impressive mosaic under their feet. Their entrance caused everyone present to suddenly go quiet. There were only 9 beautifully sculpted, dark wooden chairs, arranged in a circle, and 2 of them were empty. Only 7 people were seated, but each had a little group behind them, from 2 to as many as 7 people. It was clear the people present were all some sort of nobility, or at least wealthy in some way. Tessa glanced over their wooden or silver jewelry, the colored fabric of their clothes, and the few fur capes. Yasim clearly hadn't lied about the wealth difference. The 2 young women were like walking treasures compared to everyone else who was present. Aside from theirs, the only gold items in the room were a couple of rings, a necklace, and a bracelet, all worn by the same group of people. Everyone was staring at them in awe as they walked into the center. Tessa wasn't afraid to hold their gaze either. Their appearance was causing a commotion, and those people were already watching in amazement, glaring and whispering conspicuously. Because they were standing behind Yasim and 4 of the soldiers, they could only see more and more of the room as they walked farther in. Unlike her cousin, Cecilia was more absorbed in the architecture around them than the dozens of stairs they were getting. This was the only room with a high, round, and vaulted ceiling, and the mosaic up there, similar to the one under their feet, was a breathtaking piece of art. "How dare you come back?" The deep voice resonated throughout the room, sending a chill down everyone's back. Tessa and Cecilia stopped walking and glanced at each other. The king. They couldn't see him because he was straight ahead, and their vision was blocked by the 5 men in between. Yet, even without seeing him, they could feel the weight of his presence in everyone else's reaction. Cecilia glanced around them. Everyone in the room was tense, and suddenly looking down, as if they had been scared to make eye contact with the king, even by chance. Only the people seated were looking in their direction, their eyes going on either Yasim or the two girls, visibly worried. But worried for whom? "Greetings, my king," said Yasim, sounding strangely composed. "You were banished," hissed the king, his words as sharp as blades. "How dare you defy your king and come back? This humble servant didn't disobey, my king. I merely followed your own orders." "Ha!" scoffed the king. "Then, who is it? Are you aware you brought a woman to be killed by my hands, Yasim? Do you think I'd indulge them for the sake of you?" Tessa put a hand on her bag, where her blades were hidden, frowning. In any case, she was ready to defend her cousin and kill that king if necessary. She wasn't scared of these people. However, as she glanced to her right, Cecilia's expression didn't seem to hold anything like fear either. Instead, she had her green eyes riveted right ahead, looking almost expectant. Her cousin's chest was rising up and down with her accelerated breathing, and her lips were slightly open. Tessa released her fingers on the bag, wondering what was going on. "My king charged me with the heavy task of finding him a prospective wife." "Your Highness, you said this old counselor of yours was allowed to bring one, and, if she became your Majesty's queen among all the possible candidates, you would spare my life and retract my banishment. I didn't think you'd dare try, you senile old man. So you've chosen death." "I believe I have chosen to try and remain by my master's side, my king. Please, will you allow this senile old man to introduce his candidate?" "This is inadmissible," suddenly shouted one of the men seated. "How dare this traitor come back? Your Majesty, you don't have to listen to this decrepit traitor. The candidates have already been chosen." "This." The man suddenly went mute as he turned his head toward the king, and his eyes opened wide in fright. He immediately went back to looking down, visibly terrified. They all heard a scoff. "See, Yasim, no one wants you here. Did you think I was being kind to you because I gave you a reason to be allowed back? Fine, then. Let's see who was insane enough to follow your lies all the way here." Yasim bowed slightly, and every soldier stepped aside, letting the two girls appear. Only Cecilia stood forward, unafraid. She walked ahead, past all the men, and to the center of the room, facing the king. She was stunning in her own way, standing tall and facing the sovereign, unafraid. Her skin was lighter than anyone else in the room, and yet it was a warm, beautiful, brown copper shade that contrasted with those amazing, green eyes. Not only that, but she wore a striking purple dress under a white fur coat, and all that gold. All eyes turned to the king, waiting to see his reaction to the foreign woman. It wasn't anything like they expected. Ashen the White was seated on the simplest throne in the room, although his was in silver metal, without any decoration, cushion, or embellishment of any kind. The king himself didn't wear any jewelry, crown, or expensive fabric. The scars on his exposed torso visible to all. Yet, he was standing out more than anyone else in the room. His white hair, as white as snow, was falling in irregular waves on his large, muscular shoulders, a striking contrast to his dark skin. His face was sculpted with thick lines and a square jaw with a few spikes of a growing beard sticking out. Despite him looking no older than 30, there was something scarily deep and ancient in his dark eyes. The dark circles beneath them made it even worse, burying his irises deeper in the shadows. He didn't seem human, or like he was the same kind as the other people standing in the room. He exuded an aura of death and danger like a resting predator. The silver chair may as well have been a god's throne, a god of death. Anyone with any experience in battles could tell he was a warrior and a merciless killer. The way all the other people in the room physically reacted to his presence reeked of sheer terror. Cecilia was the only one not to display an ounce of fear. Instead, as she appeared before him, the king's previous irritated expression fell. An incredible silence befell the room as if they had all been transported to a sacred place. In fact, they were witnessing an epic scene, a living painting. There seemed to be no one else but those two people, and all the others were quiet witnesses. No one could understand what was happening, but it felt breathtaking. The complex emotion on the cold-blooded king's face, and the princess' pure, candid gaze she held without fear. Even Yasim was shocked by what he was seeing. Before any of them had realized, the king was standing, his eyes riveted on the young woman as if he couldn't believe his eyes. There was something happening between those two people, something deep, complex, and personal. Your Highness, mumbled Yasim, this is Princess Cecilia, daughter of the Dragon Empire, niece of Her Highness the Empress. The king didn't reply. In fact, it was as if he hadn't heard the old man at all. His eyes were still riveted on Cecilia as if he was seeing a ghost, or a monster. The princess was the first to react. Very slowly and gracefully, she bowed, her long hair sliding down her shoulders as she lowered her head to him. King Ashen, she simply said in a delicate voice. That was it, yet those words looked as if she had slapped the king. In utter shock, his subjects saw him take a step back. Something felt wrong about all of this, something no one else could understand. However, the king didn't reply to the Dragon Empire's princess. He clenched his fists, and instead, directed his furious glare toward Yasim. You cunning old snake, he hissed, looking like he was about to murder the elder. Everyone in the room was trying to make sense of this situation. Was the king sparing the princess because of the Dragon Empire? Why was that young woman completely unafraid? How was old Yasim even still alive after daring to do such a thing? More importantly, what was that reaction earlier? Your Majesty, said one of the nobles. You don't have to add the princess to the candidates. If you refuse her, we can send the lady back to her homeland. As he said that, the man had looked at Cecilia, but she hadn't reacted at all. In fact, he should have watched his king instead. Ashen suddenly turned his murderous glare to him, and the man felt his lifespan vanish at once. Normally, after that, there would have been no way to keep his head on his shoulders. Not when the king was visibly about to have him pay for those words with his life. Yet, nothing came. The king looked stuck where he was, unable to unleash his usual display of complete violence. She stays, he hissed between his clenched teeth. Everyone there was once again rendered speechless. What was wrong with the king? He could have obviously refused Yasim's offer, sent those women back where they came from, and killed the old man once and for all. In fact, that was the most optimistic ending everyone had foreseen the minute Yasim had reappeared. Being unable to grasp the king's reactions was certainly scarier than his usual murderous ones. Everyone in the room kept staring, in utter dismay. No one dared to say a thing anymore. Instead, they were trying to make sense of this, or ready to give up as long as they'd keep their heads. Even Tessa, a few steps behind her, was staring at her cousin and the king in confusion. She had known Cecilia since they were children, and she found something unusual in her cousin's behavior. She had never been one to step forward like this or stand out at all. Yet now, she was dominating the room, almost equal to that ruthless king. Even more intriguing was the way that ruthless king was staring at Ceci. With everyone deeply involved in this odd situation here, and those two people who kept staring at each other as if a world belonged between them, they all failed to notice the new appearance. She silently stepped out from the shadows behind the king. Her red dress floating around her, the young woman walked with a smile on her lips, stepping fearlessly next to the king. She had deep red hair, a hint of sharpness in her black eyes, and was amazingly beautiful. Her chuckle resonated as she stood very close to the king, her with a smile on her red lips. She leaned to whisper in his ear. "Do we have guests, my king?" The king didn't react or answer her, but she didn't seem offended at all. Instead, she kept a perfect smile, and put a hand on his shoulder, staring at Cecilia with him. Cecilia had stopped staring at the king to shift her green eyes to the woman standing next to him. It wasn't just that woman's attitude that was shocking. It was her olive skin tone. The two cousins exchanged a quick glance, both disturbed. They had never seen anyone with a skin color this close to their mothers before. There had been a brief trend about women trying to lighten their skin, but it wasn't anything like they were witnessing now. This woman by the king's side was clearly mixed, like them, and more fair-skinned than dark. Although her hair was more likely to be artificially tainted, she couldn't fake her skin colors so easily, nor how her traits were reminiscent of a long-forgotten race of people, the same race both Tessa and Cecilia were descendants of. The Rain Tribe. "Welcome, Your Highness," she said with that beautiful smile, "and I suppose I'm talking to the famous traitor, Sir Yusum. It must have been a long journey back from the Dragon Empire." The way she spoke, in a gentle and whispery manner, was troubling. Something in Cecilia's mind told her this woman was acting polite, but not friendly. Even her attitude as she stood next to the king spoke volumes. She had no fear and displayed her pride and self-confidence without an ounce of hesitation. Tessa glared at Yusum, hoping they'd get an explanation for this too, but the old man looked baffled. From that woman's speech, he had visibly never met her in person. However, anyone could see how familiar she was with the king. If it had been the Dragon Empire, she surely would have been some sort of concubine, but here, the girls were unsure. Everything was new, they couldn't be sure of anything. The rules and customs ought to be different from their homeland. Instead, Tessa glanced around. In fact, all the nobles present were either ignoring that woman or looking upset by her. So, she wasn't too popular with anyone here. Yet, she stood by the king's side like this? Meanwhile, Cecilia was still staring at the odd couple facing her. Her expression had changed, and her green eyes showed something bitter compared to before. As a few seconds passed in silence, the red-haired woman sighed. "Looks like I ruined the mood here. I am Giselle, the king's attendant. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Attendant? This woman was clearly the king's mistress. The king suddenly sat back on his throne with a sullen expression. He was still staring at Cecilia and hadn't reacted at all to Giselle's appearance, but it didn't seem to matter. The red-haired woman kept her perfect smile on and took a step back, standing just 1 foot behind the throne, her hands behind her back. Enough, groaned the king. Resume. In just 2 words, the whole atmosphere changed, every noble in the room eager to please. The soldiers that were flanking Yasim quickly moved aside, leaving the old man free for now. His shoulders visibly relaxed, but Yasim didn't forget his primary mission. He was about to gently guide Cecilia and her cousin to the side when Giselle spoke up. Ah, the guests should take the empty seats. We aren't waiting for anyone. Although that seemed like an innocent and considerate couple of sentences, both girls noticed how Yasim's expression fell while hearing this, and the other nobles looked down too. Neither Cecilia nor Tessa moved, waiting for the old man to indicate how to react. Yasim silently clenched his fist and nodded painstakingly. I see. I'll stand, suddenly said Cecilia. All eyes turned to her, visibly surprised not by her stutter, but by how openly she defied the king's woman's offer. She didn't even look her way and wasn't looking toward the king anymore. Instead, she simply stood behind old Yasim as he had moved aside, actually standing next to those 2 empty seats. Tessa nodded and did the same, both young women standing behind Yasim. They weren't so blind as to ignore what was going on completely. There were 9 seats in this room, aside from the king's, and Yasim had mentioned 9 lords during their trip there. Judging from his shattered reaction and Giselle's words, they could easily imagine what had happened, and why they shouldn't sit in those seats. The reactions of the nobles weren't all the same this time. Some kept staring at them, clearly intrigued, some subtly nodded, and some shook their heads. As you wish, chuckled Giselle. One of the nobles standing sighed, and stepped forward, taking the middle spot of the room they had stood in just before. Your Highness, with the addition of Princess Cecilia from the Dragon Empire, this now makes a total of 10 candidates as to who your future queen might be. The king wasn't looking at the old man at all. Instead, his eyes were still fixated on the princess, unblinking, with the frown on. Cecilia, however, wasn't staring his way at all anymore. She was slightly leaning toward Yasim, who had just whispered to her. This is Councillor Yamano, an old friend. He is a good man. Tessa and Cecilia slightly nodded, listening to Councillor Yamano's words. I shall repeat the agreement for the Princess of the Dragon Empire. According to the rules agreed by the 7 noble families, each family and royal councillor is free to introduce any young woman of marriageable age as a king's candidate. Each candidate and her family shall receive 10,000 silver coins as compensation. Tessa silently smirked, glancing to the side to see which of the nobles had reacted to that sentence. So some of them had probably traded their daughters for some money. Each candidate will receive a room and stay for at least a month within the castle. During the time spent here, the candidates are free to access any area of the castle they please and use their free time as they will. However, they have the obligation to attend all the social events organized by the royal castle, the official meetings like this one, and obey each of the king's orders. Any refusal or absence to any of the aforementioned rules will result in the elimination of the candidate, who will be sent home and have all the previous rewards confiscated. Cecilia grimaced, and so did her cousin. They had to obey all of the king's orders? This rule felt horribly ominous. His Majesty will select his future bride among the candidates. The family of the chosen candidate will receive, among other presents, 10,000 gold coins and eternal glory. The new queen will be the official queen of our Eastern Kingdom, and mother to all the official heirs to the throne. She will assume all the responsibilities of her rank and position, and be the king's left hand in all but military matters. Another rule that the war god's daughter and niece did not appreciate at all. All but military matters? Now that they looked around them, all the women present looked very fragile and delicate. None of them looked like they could lift a weapon. The counselor took a deep breath, briefly glancing toward Cecilia before resuming. Today is the final call for all the selected candidates. If any candidate or her family wishes to withdraw, this is the last chance before they are officially entered. No punishment will be held against those who choose to retract now. I will call the names of each candidate and have them confirm, as well as their families. One by one, the counselor called out each of the candidates. Surprisingly enough, they all answered loud and clear their will to partake in this competition to be crowned queen, but only half of the said candidates seemed to actually be present here, aside from Cecilia. In each case, a member of the family gave an excuse for their candidate not being there, claiming she was ill or still on her way, and no one objected to this. Cecilia felt out of place listening to this. She hadn't thought she was walking into a competition with other women, and she didn't like it at all. "Ceci, we can go home," whispered Tessa as the counselor was still calling out the others. "This is ridiculous, you're a princess, there's no reason for you to compete for that crazy guy." Cecilia knew where her cousin's opinion came from. This indeed felt very foolish. However, now, it was clear her fate was intertwined with Yasim's. Moreover, there were still too many questions pending, including why Giselle wasn't called among the candidates. Cecilia had listened. For each candidate, they mentioned her name and her family's, but Giselle never spoke, and everyone seemed to forget her for a few seconds. She wasn't among the competitors. The 9th candidate is Lady Neptune, introduced by myself, and my niece is willingly partaking in this. She will arrive tomorrow. Finally, Yasim glanced toward Cecilia. He knew his life was in her hands, and so did she. Their eyes met, and the young woman nodded slightly. The old man didn't hide the wave of relief in his eyes, instead looking infinitely grateful. He turned to his former colleague, and stepped forward. The 10th candidate is Imperial Princess Cecilia of the Dragon Empire, introduced by myself, former Counselor Yasim. "Princess Cecilia," called out one of the 7 lords, "are you really going to participate?" "Yes," nodded the princess. She hadn't stuttered, nor was she hiding from their gazes. Instead, all the nobles quickly tried to glance the king's way. Ashen had his hand covering his mouth, but his eyes were still fixated on the princess. It was hard to understand what he was thinking, except for the way his fist was clenched on his throne. "Well, we have 10 candidates then," nodded Counselor Yamano. Suddenly, the king stood, and all the nobles seated stood 1 second after him. It was like a storm had suddenly broken into the room, putting everyone present in survival mode. Some were frozen by fear, others looked ready to run away. There was a general movement of stepping away from the throne and the man standing a step in front of it. However, Ashen didn't say anything. He stood there for a couple more seconds, like a statue of ice with eyes of fire. After one last glare in Yasim and Cecilia's way, he suddenly stormed out of the room. No one said a word, and it took a couple of seconds after he was gone for anything to be heard, anyone to dare move. It had all happened so quickly, not everyone had understood what had happened. The only one who could still keep a smile on was Giselle. If she had been shocked by the king's sudden outburst, no one had seen it. She still had her little smile on, and her eyes met Cecilia's. The princess already didn't like that woman, like a lioness who knew she was faced with a rival. Giselle gave her a little wink and quietly walked out while everyone else still seemed stunned. The second person to react was Yasim. He turned around and looked at the two women. "Let's go," he quietly muttered. They both followed him as he quickly left the room, visibly needing to run away. They had barely walked out when a loud banter exploded inside, many people shouting after the old man and calling to him. Yasim didn't pay any attention to them and guided the two women out instead. He looked like he finally could control the situation a bit and was guiding them away, through the corridors and farther away from the previous room. After a little while, they seemed sufficiently far enough, although it was only 1 floor below. He let out a long sigh, a bit out of breath after this speed walking. "What was that?" exploded Tessa, clearly unable to hold it in any more. "A competition to be that's wife? Old man, I should be the one to cut your neck right now." "Tessa, calm down," muttered Cecilia. "Ceci, I'm not going to calm down. That old schmuck lied to us, and now you have to compete with 9 other crazy girls, most of which were probably forced to do this? And you guys think we are asterisk? Our fathers don't even dare take concubines, and you want to make Ceci beg for this tyrant to marry her while he's already got that red slut on the side. I swear to the gods I had no idea about that woman," said Yasim. I had heard rumors the king had taken in a mistress after I was dismissed, but I never met that woman before." "She's not a candidate?" asked Cecilia, ignoring her furious cousin. "One needs a strong backing to be appointed a candidate, my lady," said Yasim. "All the women presented before belong to the strongest families of the kingdom, and even the 2 councillors who also introduced candidates are very wealthy men. I wouldn't have been able to pick anyone but you. So you came to our empire to trick Ceci into this mess," groaned Tessa. "Now you're really going to lose your neck, old man. Just you wait until our family hears the Tessa," said Cecilia, suddenly stepping up to her. "Stop, please. I am fine." Because Cecilia asked her to calm down so frantically, her cousin frowned, tilting her head. She crossed her arms. "Ceci, why did you agree to this?" But instead of answering, her cousin stayed mute and slowly shook her long locks. Tessa noticed her green gaze. This was the glance Cecilia would make sometimes, when there was something she couldn't say. It was a look she knew all too well, but it broke her heart each time. Ever since that had happened to her cousin, Tessa could tell there was something horribly sad and dark buried in her cousin's heart, trapped in a chest Cecilia always refused to open. Each time she got close to that chest, Cecilia did this. Those sad eyes, and her voice that disappeared, as if she was asking her not to ask any more. This had to be related to what had happened with the king just before, in that room. Tessa was the first one shocked by it. She thought she knew almost everything about Cecilia, but never had she seen her like that. For perhaps the first time, something had happened to that glass shell. A crack, perhaps. A little, shy opening into that tightly closed chest. Tessa took a long breath, trying to keep it in and calm down. Fine, she grumbled, but I'm going to make you pay for that later, old man. Or I'm just going to wait for Cashin and Darson to hear this and come and slice you, and watch. Thank you for your benevolence, Lady Tessa, muttered poor Yasim. And once again, I apologize for lying to you like this, Lady Cecilia. However, please know I didn't do this to trick you, but because I had good reasons to believe my king would have special feelings for someone from the Dragon Empire. What? Muttered Tessa, confused. Yasim kept staring at Cecilia, visibly expecting something, but the princess remained mute. If she wasn't curious to know what he meant like her cousin, it meant she probably knew the truth, and his theory was right. All right. Let's move to your new room, said Yasim, understanding he wouldn't get an answer now. I am a humble ex-counselor, but I am sure Counselor Yamano will help me arrange something decent for the princess and Lady Tessa. You two are technically of higher standing than any of the candidates, after all. It won't be necessary, suddenly said Counselor Yamano's voice. The man had just appeared, looking a bit out of breath too. He took a second to catch his breath, as he was much more massive than old Yasim. In fact, Yamano was so large his belly almost touched both sides of the corridor. He did look like a good, nice man, though, with his head as round as his belly, and his little, white, curly goatee. Counselor Yamano, exclaimed Yasim, visibly happy to see his friend again. You sure still run fast, Yasim, sighed Yamano. You're one crazy old man, to come back after making His Highness so furious, and from the Dragon Empire too. You know me, replied Yasim with a little smile. I will never give up on our dear homeland. Ha! If only our young king could still find mercy for old antiques like us. Anyways, the princess and her cousin, said Tessa. I'm Tessa, by the way. Oh, nice to meet you, Lady Tessa. And of course, Lady Cecilia, as well. I am Yamano, the oldest counselor, and the last one mad enough to still be friends with Yasim, or perhaps, lucky enough, seeing he's still got his head on his shoulders. I came to tell you the ladies are welcome in the Cerulean Suite. The Cerulean Suite, repeated Yasim, surprised. But, it's the best room in the castle. No one has been allowed to use it since the previous king's favorite. How did you manage to? Oh, I didn't do anything. It's an order from the king himself. He ordered the servants to prepare and give that room to the princess, to Princess Cecilia. The two counselors kept exchanging intrigued glances, even as they were leading the way to the Cerulean Suite. There was definitely something going on between the king and the princess. Was he simply trying to act polite to a foreign princess by giving her the best room in the castle? Was it an attempt to show that they could still rival the Dragon Empire's luxury? No, it couldn't be. Perhaps, if it had been anyone but their king, they would have seriously considered such a theory, but this was King Ashen they were both thinking about. The cold-blooded, heartless king with no consideration for anyone. He didn't even treat any of his vassals with that much consideration, not even his oldest servants. Why would he suddenly give the best room to Princess Cecilia? Neither of them had even been allowed to see that room. The rumor was that it was the most beautiful place in the whole castle, prepared by the previous kings to welcome their favorite wives or mistresses. Yet, rather than that devious, red-haired woman, the king was giving this to a young woman he had supposedly seen for the first time today? Yusum kept frowning and trying to think, but he was still thinking this had to do with his initial theory about his king and the truth about his death. Unfortunately, it was still way too soon to confirm any of it. Two young servants were waiting when they arrived in front of the blue gates. In fact, those blue gates were already very eye-catching, painted in a magnetic cerulean blue, with gorgeous arabesques of a shiny, white surface that Cecilia first thought to be some polished marble, but it was shinier than what she knew. "Welcome, Princess," saluted the two servants, who appeared to be identical twins. "We were sent to serve you." They were both wearing white outfits, and a bob haircut with bangs, but their eyes couldn't be seen while they continued bowing. "By whom?" immediately asked Tessa, defiant. "By His Majesty," answered one of the twins. "The three of us will be at your service from now on." "Three?" repeated Cecilia, confused. "Yes, Your Highness, our sister is already inside," said one of them, stepping forward. "We shall open the gates to the cerulean suite for the princess now. The counselors aren't allowed to enter unless the princess requires them to." Cecilia and Tessa exchanged a glance, surprised. They were the ones to say if Yusum and Yamano could enter? They were the guests here, and those two old men were obviously royal counselors. How could they be the ones to decide whether they could enter or not? "Ah, please don't be surprised, my ladies," said Yusum, noticing their confusion. "In our kingdom, no man can enter a woman's apartment unless she agrees to it first, regardless of his position. The only one allowed to do so is the king, to whom no door shall remain closed." Tessa made a grimace. That was one distorted way to say things, but she understood the general idea. Basically, just like in the previous ways of the Dragon Empire, any man of noble or imperial title could take any woman as a concubine. However, the Empress had abolished that rule, and put new ones in place to protect young women against rapists. "The counselors are allowed in for now," said Cecilia. "Understood," nodded the two servants. Then, they each pulled one of the door's golden handles, opening it wide for Cecilia. She was stunned by the vision inside. This room felt like a completely different world from the rest of the castle. In fact, it reminded her of those magical places described in her books. The floor was suddenly so well polished that all of the round pieces of rock were completely even and smooth under her feet. She shyly walked in, her heart beating a little bit faster. The room was in the shape of a comma, with a large round area, and a little corner on the left, with a large canopy bed with cerulean blue sheets and light wood. There was another door a bit further on the wall, blue too, but for now, she was too busy processing everything else she could see. The tall columns were supporting a stunning vaulted ceiling, with an incredible mosaic of iridescent, dark little pieces that Cecilia couldn't identify, just like the white one on the door earlier. Moreover, everything was shining incredibly, with all the colors her eyes could catch, reflecting the little movements of the water around her. Similar to what they had seen in the corridors, there were little streams of water crossing the room, all leading to the side opposite the door. And in fact, there was no wall opposite to them. Instead, there were more of those columns, in wide arches with a breathtaking view of the sea beyond them. Cecilia lost her breath as she walked closer to see. There was a little balustrade made of sculpted redwood to keep her from falling, but as she stood there, it was clear that half of this room was a balcony, with an amazing view of the sea, in which the water streams were falling several feet below her. She could smell the gentle, salty breeze of the sea, caressing her cheeks and freshening up the whole suite. She could hear the waves crashing against the foundations of the castle and going back gently into the large river stream. Her eyes could even spot a colored fish at times, before it quickly swam away. This room showed her the edge of the Eastern Kingdom, beyond the island they were on, the vast sea with no known end. "This is incredible," she muttered, amazed. "By Glahad's butt," whispered Tessa, somewhere behind her. "You weren't kidding, this place is gorgeous." Cecilia chuckled and turned around. Just like her, the two old counselors looked a bit lost and amazed, gazing all around as well. All the furniture showed great taste and was made in light wood, with pieces of cerulean fabric here and there. In the morning, she could just imagine the amazing sunrise they would witness that would light up the whole room. The three servants, obviously triplets, advanced forward to bow to her again. "I'm Nupia," said one of them. "I am the oldest of the triplets. The second is my brother Rupio, and the youngest of us is Lupia." "Nice to meet you," smiled Cecilia. "Nice to meet you guys," added Tessa, putting her hands on her hips. "We'll have tea, dried fruits, and meat buns for breakfast, thanks." "Tessa," protested Cecilia. "What? I'm starving." "Isn't it their job?" "We will bring it right away," said Nupia with a smile. Indeed, Rupio and Lupia quietly walked out. The triplets looked exactly the same, had the same black eyes and hair, the same dark skin shade, the same bob haircut and bangs, the same body build and white outfit, and had no distinctive feature to distinguish one from another. They seemed to be young, just at the beginning of their teenagehood, and with their thin features, it was impossible to even tell which of the three was a boy. "This room was prepared on short notice, Princess," said Nupia. "If there is anything you dislike, it will be changed right away." "Is that really all right?" asked Cecilia. "Of course." All of the candidates were given dedicated servants and assigned rooms. "This one was prepared in a rush, but we are happy to do anything you need to make it more agreeable." Nupia seemed very enthusiastic, but Cecilia was still a bit taken aback. They had only just landed this morning, and seen the king not an hour ago. This room had truly been prepared in record time. "Well, I guess we know where we'll stay from now on," said Tessa, sitting down in one of the large armchairs. "Now, will you two explain what the heck this competition thing is?" "Yes, The two counselors exchanged a glance and sighed, coming to sit with the young woman. Unlike them, Cecilia was still standing, absorbed by the white, iridescent material on the columns. She slowly caressed it with her hands, surprised by how smooth and cold it was. Tessa didn't seem surprised by her cousin's attitude, so the counselors focused on her. In fact, Yamano let out a long sigh. I have to admit, I was shocked to see you after such a long time, Yusum. I really thought His Majesty had killed you, you old fool, but it turns out you ventured to the Dragon Empire, to bring back a princess no less? What came to your tortured mind that made you return like this? I have to apologize to the ladies, sighed Yusum. This is exactly as you heard earlier. I didn't lie about being a royal counselor, I have been by the king's side for a very long time. However, I fell into disgrace a few months ago. I believe the king spared me in the name of everything I taught him over the years and the fact that I did save him once. However, he banished me from our capital, threatening that if he ever saw me again, he'd cut my throat. When I begged him to reconsider, he said I could only return if you brought a new chick for his coup, scoffed Tessa. Why Ceci, though? Why come to our empire? You should have just remained hidden and saved your neck. I am an old man, Lady Tessa, I do not fear the goddess of death. However, I did fear to leave our damaged kingdom in the hands of an even more damaged man. I believed that, if I could bring the right queen to his side, perhaps, then him sparing my life would have had some sort of fateful meaning. Tessa rolled her eyes, a bit upset. You made one dangerous bet, Yusum, sighed Yamano. However, I'm happy to see you. To be honest, I was worried about what was going to happen to all the candidates. Aren't you trying to have your niece become queen? Asked Tessa, frowning. Neptune is a very smart young woman, nodded Yamano. I thought it would be better if there was another alternative among the candidates. However, now that I have seen Princess Cecilia, I will suggest she supports you. Neptune has little ambition of her own, so I believe she will be happy to support Lady Cecilia if she wants to. All three pairs of eyes turned to Cecilia, who was still absorbed by the ceiling. She had to be listening to them because she was close by, her hands were joined and fidgeting a bit. Still, she took a little breath in, her green eyes still stuck above. Sir Yusum, what are those? She finally asked. The ceiling and the columns are made of nacre, my lady. It's a material made of polished seashells. The one used on the ceiling is dark nacre, while on the columns and doors is white nacre. It's considered a precious material here, and used mainly for decorations, dishes, or jewelry, a bit like silver in your country. It's beautiful. She smiled. Ceci, pouted Tessa. You do know this is all about you? What do you think of this competition thing? Her cousin finally turned her eyes to them. Counselor, who are the other candidates? Most were introduced by the S7 noble families, said Yamano. Because of the current situation in the kingdom, they are all desperate to be the family of the next queen, and perhaps get along better with the king. Old Yusum here did mention he wasn't exactly playing nice, said Tessa. Old Yamano sighed, patting his huge belly. It was so round under his white toga, it looked like he was about to pop out of his chair at any moment. "Did you notice the empty chairs?" he said with a sorry voice to Yasim. "The Cheshi and Kunu lords. What happened?" His Majesty got extremely mad, just 3 weeks ago, over an argument with the Kunu tribe. They were arguing about the battle at the border. As you know, this is still a sensitive matter. The Kunu always refused the king placing the royal army there instead of Kunu warriors. You know how proud and violent the Kunu tribe was. They said the wrong thing, and the next thing I saw was a bloodbath. He killed the head and all of the chieftain's family. After that, the Cheshi clan stopped attending as a protest. They were never fond of the Kunu tribe, but they said the king's ways couldn't go on anymore. I can't blame them. They haven't attended a single meeting since then, but the king has yet to say anything about it. Yasim's expression had fallen a bit lower at each word his friend said. The old man did look very shaken about the empty seats before. Cecilia came to sit beside her cousin. "The other families?" she asked. "There were 9 lords, each at the head of a tribe, powerful family or clan," explained Yamano. "I myself was born in the Duro-Safe tribe, but I renounced my privilege when I became a royal counselor. The Yekara clan is the most powerful," nodded Yasim. "I'm not surprised they are presenting 2 candidates. They have many lands and a lot of warriors. They took part in all the previous wars of the kingdom, and turned on the previous king to pledge allegiance to King Ashen. Sounds like people our grandma would love on her bad days," scoffed Tessa. "The Duro-Safe tribe is very peaceful," said Yamano. "They were once travelers, but they settled in the kingdom as fishermen. They aren't seriously participating in this, and neither are the Hashit family, they are too new among the lords. The Sesan and Yancha tribes are among the oldest of our kingdom. They are probably participating to try and make themselves more valuable to the king. They are not aggressive, though, so I don't think their candidates will fight too hard for this. I'm more worried about the Pangaha," nodded Yamano. "That clan is the richest, and very secretive. They have many businesses all across the kingdom, a lot of informants, and an eye on all the trades." "Now that sounds like my kind of people," smiled Tessa. "So, if I can remember all those names correctly, we have the warrior Yekara clan, the Duro-Safe, Sesan, and Yancha tribes, that shady Pangaha clan, the somewhat sulking Cheshi clan, and the already dead Kunu people. Who am I missing again? The Hashid family, but they aren't participating. Although, Councillor Oraun is from that family and nominated his own daughter. The 9th family is the Nahaf, and they also have a candidate. I don't know them too well, they rose at about the same time as our king." "Great, now I'm going to have to take notes," grumbled Tessa. "What about that red-haired woman? She had light skin, like me and Ceci. Where the heck does she come from to look like that and act like that? I already can't stand her attitude." Yasim was intrigued too. He hadn't thought he'd return to see his king had really taken a mistress. He felt horrible about it, after he had brought Princess Cecilia all the way here. That woman was the worst outcome he had imagined in his plan, and he also didn't like her already. He turned to Yamano, who rubbed his round cheeks with a sullen expression. "Ah! That Giselle woman, I am not too sure, to be honest with you. I heard rumors about her here and there from the servants, and then I began seeing her in the castle. She's just acting as if she had always been here. She greets us, but I've never seen her talk with anyone but His Majesty. She's most often by his side, to be honest. I quickly found out she's been with him for a while now, but no one seems to know where that woman came from." The two cousins exchanged a look. "Mother said there were other people from the Rain tribe," muttered Cecilia. "Yeah, she and my mom searched for some of them, but she only found a handful of slaves scattered in the Dragon Empire." "Rain people," repeated Yamano. "White-skinned people," said Tessa, "like our moms." "Oh. I have never seen white-skinned people, but people like you, I do." "Seriously," exclaimed Tessa, slamming her armchair and making the old men jump. "Yes," mumbled Yamano. "Well, I mean, their skin isn't as fair as yours, but the Hashut family's heir is, definitely closer to your skin color than mine. They haven't met the king yet, but I met the Hashut's lord's heir at a party not long ago. I almost thought you were his people until Yasum spoke earlier." "Hashut," repeated Tessa, turning to her cousin again. "Hashut, Hashut. Ceci, didn't Auntie used to sing that old song, when we were kids, remember? She taught us those lyrics from her native language, and Hashi was definitely the word for. It means rain."